Uh, this is season 3 of the Baskin School of Engineering Diverse Voices Speaker Series. We are thrilled that you've joined us this evening. My name is Abigail Kahn, she, her, hers, and I'm the Executive Advisor to the Dean of Engineering. And while we're not all gathered in one place, I would like to begin by noting that the residential campus of UC Santa Cruz is located on the ancestral land of the Awaswas-speaking Uipi tribe. Our Silicon Valley campus is located on the ancestral home of the Muwekwa Ohlone tribe. I want to thank the rest of the team that works together to bring diverse voices to you. Carmen Robinson, Lindy Boisvert, Adi Weinstein, and Melissa Baker. And I would also like to thank our associate, Maggie Weber, who will be providing the closed captioning for tonight's event. We are being joined by the school's dean, Alexander Wolf. Welcome, Alex. So before I introduce our very special guest, I have just a few technical notes. We're hoping to have plenty of time for questions, and we want to encourage you to post questions in the chat. My colleague, Dr. Carmen Robinson, who's Director of Student Excellence Engagement and Inclusion, will be monitoring the questions and will be reading them aloud for our speaker. And please know that no question is too basic or too far out. We really want you to feel comfortable asking whatever questions you might have. And I mentioned before that we are closed captioning this event. You can access the closed captioning at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Okay, and on to tonight's speaker. We're very excited for tonight. Jossie Haines' passion for tech started at the age of 5 when she got her first computer, which was a Commodore 64. And although she studied chemistry in college, her passion for technology led her to Silicon Valley in the middle of the dot-com boom and many others, and she started her career as a web developer. Her professional journey has taken her from PricewaterhouseCoopers to Sun Microsystems to the game company Zynga, that's the company that created Farmville, and then to Apple, where she worked on Siri and was part of a team that won a technical Emmy for Siri on Apple TV. Most recently, Jossie has been with Tile, where she started as a freelance software developer just 3.5 years ago. And since then, she has worked her way up to become VP of Software Engineering and the head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Jossie's DEI work for Tile includes developing and implementing a company-wide mentoring program, people leader training, defining the yearly strategy and budget, and working with the executive team to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is incorporated in all aspects of Tile's business. In 2020, Jossie was nominated as Best Tech Manager in the Bay Area for the Timmy Awards and Best Speaker for the Women Tech Network. She's also active as a mentor on a number of mentoring programs, including Code Path, Girls Who Code, Plato, and Everwise, which is a mentor for women entering and staying in technology. And I encourage all the students who are watching to really take advantage of that kind of mentor platform. It can be incredibly helpful to you as you launch your careers. Jossie has a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Princeton University and an MS in Computer Science from the Baskin School of Engineering at UC Santa Cruz. Jossie Haines, welcome back to Baskin Engineering, and thank you for making time for us.
It's so great to be here. Thank you. All right, let me share my screen and we can get started. All right, can you see my screen? All right, perfect.
Yes.
All right, so thank you, Abigail, for the introduction. And so I'm Jossie Haines, and I really want to share with you, why we need women to stay in the tech industry, especially now with everything going on in the world today. How do all of us actually keep women in tech? And specifically, my focus area is going to be, what is it that as women we can actually do to thrive in tech? But let's first start with why. Why is it so important for us to be doing this right now? Well, I want to start with a sobering statistic, which is that 56% of women leave tech after 10 to 20 years. and that's actually twice as many as men. And despite the common misconception that the main reason women leave tech is to start a family, it's actually the implicit biases that we tend to face on a daily basis. Things like being passed up for a promotion, having your ideas appropriated, being spoken over or interrupted, or assuming that you have a non-technical role. Or even being asked to bring in lunch during a partner meeting, which has actually happened to me in the last 3 years. Companies today are spending billions on diversity and inclusion, but the numbers are hardly moving because of the implicit biases in company cultures. Between 2013 and 2017, the number of women in CS-related fields has pretty much just hovered around 25%. And now, this is more crucial than ever. 25% of women are considering downshifting careers or leaving the workforce. And if you look at moms, that number actually goes up to 1 in 3. If we keep this up, we're going to actually have a diversity recession and end up losing the small amount of progress we've made in the last 20 years. Women have accounted for 55% of the job loss in April of last year, and those numbers were higher for women of color. In the US, 33% of the people who are hospitalized for COVID-19 are Black, but they only make up 13% of the population. We have had 2.3 million women leave the workforce since the pandemic started, and we haven't had this few women participate in the labor force since 1988. Women in December alone, women actually accounted for 100% of the job loss. Women lost 156,000 jobs and men gained 16,000. And so it's no longer about checking a box, but it's about living through it. And that's so important for companies, right? And I really want to take a step back though. And, why does it matter that we keep women in tech, right? Well, technology impacts my daily life a lot more now than it did 20 years ago when I started. But the tech we have today is not really fully addressing the needs of women or other underrepresented minorities. What are some examples? Well, voice assistants are less accurate with female voices or if you have accents. Facial recognition software doesn't work as well for people with darker skin tones. And Apple's Health Kit didn't actually include menstruation cycles when it was first released. And the list goes on. And so to truly address the needs of women and other underrepresented minorities, we have to create these companies of the future that have not only realized the diverse teams that will truly make them thrive, but they've actually done the hard work needed and ended up better in terms of collaboration, productivity, morale, as well as producing better products that truly address the needs of our diverse world. And so what are these companies of the future that I'm talking about doing differently than we do today? First, they have comprehensive DEI strategies, practices, and policies in place across their entire business. And it's not just in HR. We have to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion holistically, from hiring to the product pipeline. And the second thing these companies have is they've done the hard work to create an inclusive culture where each and every employee, no matter their differences, actually feels included and thrives. And finally, these companies have rolled out effective and fair management practices across their whole leadership team at all levels. And every single manager in the organization really is leveraging empathy as their guiding leadership principle. And in my mind, these companies are also solving a different class of problem. A lot of what we're solving today, not everything, but a lot of what we're solving today in Silicon Valley is convenience problems. I mean, do we really need another startup to mail apartment dwellers quarters so they can do their laundry? We need these companies of the future to really be taking a stab at our real challenges of the world, like education, poverty, racial inequality. They are looking to democratize and empower everyone with technology and focus on the ability to really solve these issues. So, how do we get there? How do we get to this ideal future I've kind of outlined? I think there's 3 areas. The first is, as women, we're going to need to fight to stay intact. The systemic issues I mentioned are not solved by us alone, but there's things we need to do to empower ourselves to thrive. We need to build resilience, build our networks, and find sponsors, and really take the time to build our personal brands. And at these times, more than ever, we need to be getting out there and sharing our strengths with the world. But we also can't be afraid to ask for support. For the men listening, we need you to take the time to mentor and sponsor women. Find those candidates from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds when hiring, and really being an ally to women and minorities in the workplace. And for anybody who's a leader on the call, it's about creating a culture of belonging by focusing on creating the practices and policies that reduce bias and embrace empathy. And this is something that needs to be pervasive across the entire leadership team. This can't be just execs or HR. Every manager has to learn how to lead with empathy. And especially with everything going on in the world today, that's more important than ever. But today I really want to focus and drill down on what are the things that we as women can do to thrive and stay in tech. And I want to start first with resilience. I really like this definition of resilience as advancing despite adversity. Being a woman in tech is really hard. I almost left after feeling burnt out and frustrated by the challenges. And I tell people it wasn't ever one major thing. It's the small things that happen on a daily basis. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. But I came back because if I'd walked away, I would have been walking away from having the ability to impact the future, to be sitting here today talking to you. And so we need to build the resilience to thrive amidst the challenges we face to get to gender equality in tech. And, it starts with being brave and not perfect, which is the title of a book by Reshma Shujani, the former head of Girls Who Code. And this is a quote from there that I really love. In the real world, there are no straight A's. But how many of you have felt bad if you didn't get that A? I mean, I know I was. I was distraught if I would get a B on something because I was rewarded for being perfect. And, in this book, she shares a really fascinating story. Some researchers took a group of girls and boys, and they were in separate rooms, and the researchers gave them lemonade and said, hey, the lemonade's really, really tasty. But the researchers put salt in the lemonade. The group of boys tasted it and said, ew, gross, and spit it out. The girls did not say a word, and they actually all drank it down. When the researchers asked the girls why they did this, they said they didn't want the researchers to feel bad, and so they drank it. Now, imagine that little girl at her first meeting, all grown up, and having to share her opinion. Is she going to speak up, or is she just going to drink the lemonade? And so this is why it's so important for us to be building resilience. And you might think that you need to do something dramatic, like go skydiving, but it's actually not the best way. It's really about the small things we do on a day-to-day basis. So I encourage everybody to take a moment and think of a project you've wanted to do, but maybe you're procrastinating on it because it secretly scares you. Maybe it's giving a presentation, writing a blog, maybe it's going dancing or performing in a play, once we are able to get back out there again. But now take a moment and think, what is one action that you can do towards that thing that scares you? Something maybe you can do it in 15 minutes. Put that on your calendar for tomorrow. But this isn't just a one-time thing. To build resilience, you have to do it as a daily ritual. So is there something you can do for 15 minutes every day to work towards this resilience goal? And especially with everything going on right now, I really want to talk about how resilience also means prioritizing self-care. And this is so important. With work-life integration, you can sit here in front of Zoom all day and not get up or go for a walk. And it is so crucial that you take some time to do something, whatever it is that inspires you. Exercise, meditate, journal, snuggle with your dogs, right? Whatever you do, do it without your technical distractions. And this also means learning to say no. So often we say yes to other things that are not as important as our self-care because we don't prioritize ourselves first. However, if you don't prioritize that self-care, you're not going to be able to be your best self. And, one of the things I've noticed is, especially as women, we tend to prioritize others. I was having a fascinating conversation with two of my engineers, and I was speaking to them about, work-life balance and how things are going. And the male engineer was like, I really love working at Tile. If I need to go at 3 p.m, I want to go for a workout. He's like, it's great, I can do that. The woman engineer said to me, oh, I feel bad going out for an hour to work out because, my colleagues might need me. And I was like, no, it's important. Like, put it on your calendar. Like, for me, that is like the one non-negotiable on my calendar is my Pilates 3 times a week. And, it's so important to get, whatever that time is that you really need, because that is resilience. And, being resilient doesn't mean going through it alone. And so here's where we get to item number 2 on my list, which is building a network and finding the right mentors and sponsors. And, as a woman in tech, it is invaluable to have a support group and network that you can be vulnerable with to reach your goals. They say it's lonely at the top, and it's much lonelier at the top for women in tech, because as you go up in your tech career, you're more and more likely to be the only woman in the room. And so I really encourage women in tech to start building their networks and being intentional about it. I actually use this tool called Notion, and I create a list. I have with a personal, I call it my personal CRM, and I list out who I'm going to talk to, when I'm going to reach out to them again, and take the time to ponder, who do you need on your personal board of directors? Who's your cheerleader, your role model, who challenges you and tells you the truth no matter what? We need all these types of people in our lives to really succeed and thrive. And, you can also join women in tech communities to find other women to talk to. I love Alpha and Women Who Code. There are so many other communities, though. There's lots of them. But I do want to encourage you to also build a diverse network. Obviously, it's important to network with other women, but you also have to network with men. They're the ones who have the majority of the leadership positions. So, take some time to also join networks based off of your interests. There's a couple coding Slack channels. There's a coding community called dev.to. Coding Blocks is a great coding Slack channel. There's many more. So yeah, join meetups, for example. And next, take the time to find sponsors. These are different from mentors. These are people who can help you explicitly grow and excel in your career, which means you might actually have to look beyond your immediate circles of mentors and managers. It's important to impress your boss, but it's also important to seek out someone with real power to change your career. So if you end up working in a larger organization, this might be somebody a few levels above you. And, at a startup, this might be the founder, the co-founder, maybe somebody on the executive staff. And my third recommendation for women to thrive in tech is building your personal brand. Now more than ever, it's so important to be able to differentiate yourselves and show your strengths. One of the things that I thought was amazing was earlier this year, I watched a woman who was a stay-at-home mom for many years go to a boot camp and get her first job as a software engineer within 6 months by taking the time to talk about it on LinkedIn on a daily basis and share her struggles, her vulnerabilities, and the things that she learned. And by doing that, she found a job. And so, what are your superhero powers? What are your strengths? We all have things that make us unique. And so it's important to recognize and cultivate those and share them with others. I tell people, even if you're just getting into the industry, your perspectives and insights, those things that make you unique, those are the perspectives others want to hear. So, take some time to write down 7 strengths that you think you have. And, in the mornings for the next 2 weeks, read those strengths and ask, how can you share that with others? And take some time to write about that. As I mentioned, LinkedIn, and you can write things on LinkedIn, you can create videos on YouTube, you can post things on Twitter. You don't have to be everywhere. You can be intentional about building your network. I encourage people, if you're looking for jobs somewhere, follow people who work at those companies and then see what they're posting on, LinkedIn or Twitter and respond to them. And then you can actually message them and say, oh, hey, I read this post that you were commenting on. And hey, somebody is much more likely to respond if it's a personal outreach. And, another thing that you could do is start public speaking. A lot of conferences are going virtual. And so now is actually an amazing time to be doing this. I've been getting so many more requests for doing talks since we've had COVID, and it's actually been easier to do them. But, these are just some suggestions. What's most important is that you pick something that aligns with you. Push yourself too, because maybe that's how you build your resilience as well. And as women, we tend to have a habit of being shy about promoting ourselves, but that really has to stop. We have to get over feeling bad about having to promote ourselves to get ahead. Guess what? Men are doing it all the time. And since they're more likely to be networking with other men, they actually have more opportunities to be promoting themselves. And so your next raise, promotion, job opportunity, it's not going to just make itself. You have to put yourself out there, be willing to promote yourself, and be willing to fight for what you want. And I'm not saying these things are going to be easy. Remember though, to make a difference, we have to make an impact on the future. And to be able to make an impact on the future, we have to empower women and underrepresented minorities in tech. And we need a seat at the table. And so, I've gone to the 3 areas we should focus on as women to stay in tech. Resilience, really building your network and finding sponsors, and building your personal brand. And, my goal was really to provide you an overview of each of these, as really they could each be their own talk. And so I really encourage you to pick one thing you learned today and add it to your calendar, your to-do list to take action on, because that's the most important. It's about taking action that will help us thrive. And, as I said, it's so important that we stay in tech. Technology is impacting all aspects of our daily lives, but without a diverse workforce, technology is not going to address our true needs. And women are literally walking away right now from having the ability to impact and influence that technology. And like I said earlier, I want to impact the future, but I couldn't just walk away. So I'm here to ask all of you on this call to join me in staying in tech and fighting for that better future. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Josie. We have, I'll just remind everyone that you can put your questions in the Q&A. Feel free to start adding those in. But in the meantime, we have some questions for you. Our first question is that you told a story of being asked to bring lunch to a meeting when you were part of a technical team. So can you talk about how you could push back on a request like that to make it clear that that's not an okay response, and can you talk about how not to respond, and how we can become strong advocates for ourselves?
Yeah, and so honestly, at that situation, when I was first really taken aback because I was like, why are you asking me? And then I just said, okay, you know what? Why don't we all go get lunch? Like that was my response to them. It's like, oh, instead of me going and grabbing it, why don't we all go grab our lunches? And they were like, oh, okay. And so then everybody got up and went and got it. But I had to respond and say something, right? Because yeah, the one of the managers literally turned to me and was like, could you go grab the lunches outside? And I'm like, why are you looking at me? I'm the engineering manager in charge of this project.
Right.
But it's not the only time things like that have happened. I've been at companies where I was the engineering manager and I had the male counterpart who was my project manager, and we would walk into a room together, and so many times people assumed he was the engineering manager and I was the project manager, to the point I actually got emailed an apology at one point.
Wow. That sounds extremely difficult, but you seem to have handled it really well. So that's awesome. Well, we have another question. So they commented they loved everything that you shared. And would you be willing to talk a bit about how you address being ignored and talked over at male-dominated meetings?
Yeah, and so I have a couple suggestions for this one. One of them is, don't let yourself be interrupted, right? If somebody interrupts you, say, oh, excuse me, I wasn't done yet. But what I found really honestly to be most effective is find an ally. Find somebody else in the room, especially if this is a bigger meeting that's a recurring meeting or something like that. Find an ally who you can say like, hey, look, I've noticed this happening in meetings before. Do you mind advocating for me? And then then you have somebody who hopefully will then say, oh, hey, I'm sorry, like that point was made by Josie earlier today, right? And it really helps to have that person to help advocate for you. So I really encourage, seeing what support you can also rally up. So it's not just always you raising your voice as well.
That's a great suggestion. So we do have another question for you, and it's says that it's probably a lot easier to create an app to order a laundry pickup service than it would to tackle real world problems. How can an entrepreneur or companies build a runway that will allow them to take on more significant societal challenges through their technology?
Yeah, and I think this comes down to being brave, like exactly like the person said. Yes, it is easier to start a company solving convenience problems. And a lot of the reasons people are solving the convenience problems in the Silicon Valley is look at who's making the technology. It is, a lot of, white men who have money, and that's the and they're writing technology for them. So I truly do believe if we start getting and empowering, I recently realized, my messaging has always been let's retain women in tech. And really, I realized it's about, I've decided to shift my messaging a little bit in the last couple of weeks as I've been reflecting this. And it's really more of not so much about retaining women in tech, because at the end of the day, if you're depending on what your company is doing, maybe it doesn't matter if you retain women in that company. I want to empower women and underrepresented minorities to build the technology we need to solve those real world problems, right? And so I think it's about things like, how do we democratize technology so it doesn't feel so hard to get into the space? How do we empower, no code solutions or things that make a lower barrier to entry? And, I really think it's also a diversity of thought issue. We haven't had that. And if we have, more people with diverse backgrounds starting businesses, hopefully we will tackle some more of these problems. And, I also think, countries and the world really needs to consider how do we fund these things that we fundamentally need to be addressing.
Right. That's great. It's a wonderful answer and something to really think about where we're putting our money. We have another question. How do you deal or manage with the misattribution of ideas and points to other colleagues when it was your idea or point originally?
Yeah, and so, I think this again goes back to having an ally really helps, right? Having somebody who can speak up and be like, no, actually, that was Josie's idea. Maybe we should have her talk about that more, right? It's sometimes really hard to call it out yourself in that situation, which is why I like leaning on the allies thing. But if you see it be a repeating pattern, call it out first in private, maybe especially if you see one person continuously doing it. Take the time to maybe pull them aside and say, hey, maybe you haven't noticed, but I feel like, I sometimes share an idea and then, you've repeated it without, giving me credit. And I don't know if you've noticed that. And really, come at it from a place of curiosity. But also, this is something I encourage to be discussed at a company-wide or team-wide culture level as well, right? Encourage that this is a conversation that's had at your organization. How do we create, how do you have an environment where every person feels that they're included and valued and that they can thrive? And it's not always easy to have those conversations, but we can't just put blinders on and pretend that the real world doesn't exist outside of our 9-to-5 jobs.
Right. I totally agree. So will you share some insight on how women might secure board positions in tech?
Yeah, and so, especially now there's a lot more opportunities, I think, for women to get into board positions. And so there's, a number of communities, women in the boardroom, I think there's How Will Women Lead? There's First Board. And they're really working with women to get them into board positions. And the thing about getting into a board position is it has its own process. Like it is like going through a job interview process, but totally different. You have to have a board bio. You have to understand what it means to have a board bio and what you need to put in it. You need to understand how to like pitch yourself. And it's a totally different process. And so one of the challenges is you need to learn like what that process is and how to really thrive. And thankfully, like I said, there are a number of communities really putting those processes out there. And so I really encourage, there's a lot of like just even like webinars on it, everything from like an hour panel to like a multi-day class, depending on, your level of interest on getting onto a board. But yeah, I really encourage, finding a community to work with, because it is a really hard process and it's hard to try to do it on your own.
Great, thank you. So since you're an alum, was your experience at UCSC any different from what you experienced in industry? How can the university help prepare women for empowering experiences in the workplace? And how can the university help prepare men to be better colleagues in the workplace?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So one of the things I thought was really fascinating, and so I got my degree, I believe this was in 2006. And our class was half men and half women, which I was really surprised, honestly, because that's not what you see in your typical Silicon Valley company, actually. And so in some ways, I actually think my classes were much more diverse than a lot of my day-to-day teams have definitely been in the tech industry. And so one of the things I think that is so crucial is this foundation of empathy. One of the things I talk a lot about is empathy in engineering. And a lot of software engineers say, what does empathy have to do with engineering? And you can actually make it like really tactful, like it really like about tactical, breaking it down into like how you can apply empathy to things like code reviews and really making it actionable for engineers. And I think that is one of the things that could be really beneficial for a college to help with is, so much focus is on the hard skills, which obviously are crucial, but if we build this foundation of empathy, then we can come at all workplaces with more curiosity and hopefully be able to ask these questions.
That's great. It's great advice. Were there any transferable skills from your background in chemistry that helped you transition into software engineering?
I think part of it was just like attention to detail and just learning how to break things down. A lot of chemistry, especially like on the lab side, was really like experimentation and thinking about how you put things together, right? And at the end of the day, computer science is really it's the same type of problem solving, just with a different mechanism. You're not dealing with, organisms here. You're just dealing with zeros and ones. But at the end of the day, you're solving problems, right? And so this is one of the reasons I don't always say like you need to have a 4-year computer science degree to get a job in the tech industry. And that's actually one of the things that's been a barrier for, underrepresented minorities getting into tech. And so I really, for me, I thrived because I just had the mindset of breaking things down, thinking of problems, thinking about the big picture. And but a lot of my day-to-day in chemistry, I obviously don't use.
Great. So what are some ideas for supporting advocacy and driving policy-based diversity and inclusion in a technical business? How do we expand on rapport and communications within a company for minorities and women?
Ah, such a good question. And one of my favorite things I like talking about. So everybody can make a difference. If you're working in the tech industry, every single employee has a voice, right? You can speak up and say, I think this is important and something that we need to focus on. And so I empower people to want to start, employee resource groups, start an allyship committee. I tell everybody the important thing to understand about diversity, equity, and inclusion is this is a learning journey. You're not going to always get it right, and you're not going to always get it perfect. Like I've been doing this for years, and I still sometimes mess up. But it's about admitting it and then figuring out how to improve things and making it better. And, I think the empathy is really where the communication and rapport needs to come in. Make sure you're creating the opportunities for women and minorities to have a voice within your company, right? Are they able to participate and share, but are they also invited to the room to listen in on the important meetings and figure out what's going on? And it's about driving DEI across the entire company. So it's not just about thinking about it from HR. A lot of places, you focus on the hiring pipeline, and that's great. But if you don't also focus on creating the inclusive culture, then this is how we have this like rotating churn in the tech industry. And so and the inclusive culture, like that's really the hard part in a lot of ways, because you have to call people out lovingly, but you have to call people out when they mess up. And that can be vulnerable.
Absolutely. So how do we avoid the mistaken perception that the underrepresented need mentors because they need extra help refactoring to succeed versus focusing on changing the environment to support different definitions of success? It often feels like mentorship is effective, but it is offered by the powerful when their recipes for success don't always translate to those they mentor.
Yes, and this is why when I spoke, I mentioned sponsoring. And a lot of times people think, oh, I just need a mentor. And women and underrepresented minorities are over mentored and over sponsored. And so if you're a woman, advocate for finding a sponsor, right? And it might be somebody who doesn't look like you. It might not be somebody who you'd get along with as a mentor, right? And sometimes that's a challenging thing to think about is like, your mentors are people who might be your confidants. You can be really vulnerable with them. And hey, you might have that relationship with your sponsor, but you might not, right? And so I think that's the challenge that women sometimes find in finding those sponsors is that they don't realize like the sponsor might be somebody who's very, very different from you, and you need to figure out how to get into that circle and influence them, right? And so, this is also a messaging thing and really about, getting the leadership teams within the tech industry to understand, like, you need to be sponsoring, the women and the underrepresented minorities joining. And so, I don't know if as a university, when you do partnerships with companies coming in to recruit, that's something you could talk to the recruiters or the leaders about is, hey, how do you create sponsoring opportunities for, your new grads who are coming in, especially those from diverse backgrounds.
That's great. So you mentioned empathy as an approach to team operations, such as code reviews. Could you break that down with a practical example?
Yes, so let's actually talk about empathy and code reviews and break that down. So empathy and code reviews actually comes from two perspectives. Let's start from the person who wrote the code. Now, as the person who wrote the code, you need to have empathy for the people who are reviewing it. They did not go on your coding journey with you. They were not in all those decision-making meetings. They don't know why you did this the way they did. So when you're about to have a pull request where you're getting your code checked, realize that. Make it more like a little archaeological dig and like list all of the references they need. There's a tricky part of the code, add a comment to it. And guess what? Now you've not only had empathy for your current colleagues who are actually reviewing this code, you actually now are having empathy for any future colleagues who might join your team, because they're actually able to go read that pull request in the future and actually understand what happened. But now let's talk about empathy from the reviewer perspective as well. So, a lot of times, if somebody more senior is coming in and looking at the code, sometimes people can feel like it's more of a power trip about doing a code review. And I say, that's not what a code review is at all. This is a knowledge sharing opportunity, and it's about learning and growing. And so for the people who are reviewing, I say, have empathy for your colleagues. Even if you see a mistake that you think is stupid and you're like, why in the world would anybody ever do that? Guess what? Do you ever like anybody starting a question at you saying like, why did you do it this way? No, like I don't like that. And so why would you ever do that to one of your colleagues? And so I say, don't ever start any questions with why did you or why didn't you? Rephrase your questions and really take into account that there's most likely a reason your colleague implemented something a certain way, and give them the benefit of the doubt and start with trust and come at it from a place of curiosity when you're asking your questions in your code reviews. And so, that's kind of how I break down code reviews, but you can break down meetings the same way with like, how do you apply empathy to meetings? And so, it's about applying it to all the different practices that you have on a day-to-day basis and figuring out how you can really create a more inclusive environment for everybody. Oh, you're muted.
I muted. Thank you so much for going into detail about that. That was a wonderful example. So what are your opinions about the current state of diversity training in tech? What changes, if any, do you think should be made?
Oh, so this is one this has been kind of my side passion along with looking at the DEI side, because I think the learning side is really intertwined with this. And what do I mean? I think in general, we don't do learning the right way in the business development setting, whether it's DEI, whether it's leadership training, whatever we have. A lot of times in these cases, you sit somebody down for an hour, 2 hours, once a year, you have them watch a video, maybe it's an interactive class, and then nothing happens, right? Well, that's not how we learn as humans, especially in a working environment. We learn by teaching others and taking action on things. And so, if you are going to have a leadership class or a DEI class, that's great. But then follow it up on a weekly or monthly basis with little action items of like, hey, do you remember this thing from that class? Are you doing that? And make it really, I call it the learning drip system, right? Like, how do you drip out learning content in small, actionable ways to make people really remember and reinforce it and actually apply it?
I agree. I think that is very important, is to continue. It's a continuation of practice.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk about the differences, or maybe we should talk a little bit more about how you manage your team and if you've had, I guess when you go about hiring, or if you were just kind of fell into a team, and the diversity within your team that you manage.
Yeah. So, I think hiring is such an important thing to think about, right? And it's about, you can't just source on LinkedIn for if you want to increase the diversity of your teams, right? You need to go to the communities where you can find people. And there's, as I mentioned, there's Women Who Code, Alpha, there's Techeria, there's the Black Tech Pipeline, there's Blacks in Code. Like I could start listing like organizations. And so take the time to partner with these organizations. So many companies, you can mentor for them and provide them a support opportunity, be sponsors for some of these people. Another way to really help increase like the diversity on your teams is really thinking about apprenticeship programs or really like boot camp programs to really help get, underrepresented minorities and women into the tech industry through a process that really that sets them up to succeed. And so, it's really important when you're, as the hiring manager, at the end of the day, you're the one who has the ultimate ability to control the diversity on your team. You decide who is being hired. And you also decide the culture on your team because you're most likely the one setting that by example. And so I really say it's the middle managers in the tech industry that are the ones that are going to need to make the biggest difference for us to create more diversity. Because if they don't really change, like nothing's going to change in tech.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and it's great that there are different ways of getting out to different people instead of maybe the same old pipelines that have been used in the past. So what would be a few tips for men who want to be strong allies for women in tech?
Yes. So, focus on hiring those women and underrepresented minority candidates, right? Like when you're looking at your hiring pipeline, if you see it's all men, speak up, ask where is that, where is the diversity? Like how, talk to your recruiter, talk to your sourcer, ask them like, hey, how are we going to do this? Like, and it needs to be a partnership. You're going to get actually much more successful responses as a hiring manager directly, especially if you're writing personalized messages, than recruiters. And so it really behooves you to take the time to kind of think about that when you're, kind of doing your like recruiting and the sourcing pipelines. And then it's also about thinking about reducing bias in the interview, hiring, and evaluation process. So can you do things like blind resume reviews? Can you have structured interviews that are really based on competencies instead of experiences? And really thinking about it holistically, but also the biggest thing is advocating for women when they're not in the room, right? And I think that's when you really are taking it to the next level. When you're willing to speak up, even if the person who's impacted isn't there. And that is where you're truly seeing change happen, when you're seeing things like that happen on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. Those are great tips. I think we have time for one last question. So they ask if you talk about mentorship and D&I.
Yeah, and so I started Tile's mentoring program when I joined Tile, actually, as a full-time employee in late 2018. And so we've actually had, I think we just wrapped up our 6th iteration of our mentoring program. And we've had 6 people within the company actually be able to switch jobs to totally different departments through mentoring. And actually, I think all except one of those was a woman. And so, I really do see that by having a mentoring and sponsoring program, like we're really helping people thrive and find out about different aspects of tech that they might not have learned before, give them opportunities that they might not have had before. And so, but you need to be really, you need to think about how you're implementing it so we don't get into the situation somebody commented on earlier, where you end up over mentoring people, but you don't end up actually promoting them and helping them thrive and succeed. And so I really encourage that you take a look at that as you're setting up these mentoring programs and making sure that your outcomes are really aligning with the goals.
Great. Abigail?
Uh-oh. Hi, sorry about that. It looks like I'm being showered by sun. Sorry about that. Jossie, that was so fantastic and so inspiring. I have like 6 pages of notes. Carmen, thank you so much for managing the Q&A. The questions were fascinating. I hope we can sort of track the questions that came in. Thank you to our audience for being part of this really fascinating discussion. Jossie, thank you for coming back to your alma mater and sharing your insights and your inspiration. We're very grateful. And so we hope that everyone will tune in for the final episode of season 3 of Diverse Voices. And at this point, I think we can say good night.
All right, good night. It was great being here.
Thank you, Jossie. Thank you.